Fractions are a very important concept to learn in math. A fraction is a number that represents part of a whole. That is, when you divide something into a number of equal parts, each piece is one part of the whole thing that you started with. This might sound a little tricky, but fractions are easiest to understand when you see them. So using art to talk about fractions seems like a perfect combination. The interesting part of this is that fractions are also really important in art. Artists use fractions to help them plan their pictures all the time. Let's start with some abstract paintings first to help us understand equal parts. Then we will look at some other kinds of pictures to see how artists use math in places we might not expect. We're starting with this lithograph by Frank Stella. This is a kind of print, and he later used this design to develop a much larger painting. Let's start with the parts and the numbers. There is one picture. This is our whole. In that picture, or the whole, we have two squares that are exactly the same size. These are halves. It takes two halves to make one whole. Now let's focus on one of the squares for a moment. The artist has divided each square into 4 triangles that are all the same size. These are called quarters. Now back to the whole picture. How many equal parts do we have all together? If you said 8, you're right. There are 8 triangles that are all the same size. You'll see the fractions written out in this diagram. The denominator, or the number on the bottom, is 8. Can you see why? This is the number of equal sections in our painting. The numerator, or the number on top, is 1. 1 for each section. One triangular section in the picture is 1 over 8. One square would be 4 over 8. There are 4 triangular sections in each of the squares that make up our painting. Now let's move on to another abstract painting. How many different colors do you see here? If you guessed 4 or 5, I'd say that you're right. In truth, there are 4 colors: blue, red, yellow, and black. But if you take a close look at the blue section, you'll see a light blue and a darker blue, so that could make you say 5. But the big question here is, are each of the colored sections equal in size? At a quick glance, we'd all probably say no. Does this mean the artist didn't care about fractions? Not at all. In fact, he has used fractions very cleverly in this composition, but he has used the same color in more than one equal part. Let's divide it up and you will see. I've used the small blue rectangle to set the size for my grid. I have divided the painting into 8 equal parts. That means 8 pieces which are all exactly the same size. Now do you see it? The yellow and the red squares are each made up of 2 rectangles that are the same color. The same is true for the black rectangle. We have 8 equal sections. Each rectangle would be written as 1 over 8 in a fraction. There are 2 blue rectangles, 2 black rectangles, 2 yellow, and 2 red. Even though the colored blocks appear to be different shapes and sizes, they are all based on fractions that look like this. The number 8 tells us how many equal parts there are in our painting. This is the denominator, which is always on the bottom of a fraction. The number 2 tells us how many parts there are in each color. This is the numerator, which is always on top. In one more abstract painting, I'd like you to try and figure out what the fractions would look like yourself. Here goes. In this painting by Guido Molinari, start by figuring out how many equal parts there are. Pause the video if you need some time to figure it out, and write down your answer. If you counted 12 equal parts, you're right. One stripe is 1 part, and they are all the same size. So our denominator is 12. Now some questions. How many parts are green? And how would you show this as a fraction? What is the fraction for parts that are blue? Or parts that are purple? Write down your answer as a fraction. If your answer looks like mine, that's great. The fractions for each color are 2 over 12. That means in this painting there are 2 sections of each color out of 12 sections in total. Now, how many parts are not green? How would you write that as a fraction? If you wrote down 10 over 12 are not green, you've got it. That's great work. What other ways can you think to make fractions from this painting? Give it a try with your own descriptions. We've just spent a bit of time talking about math and looking at abstract paintings. This is an easy combination to use to learn about fractions because the artists that I have chosen are all very interested in using equal parts to make a picture that is interesting and pleasing to look at. Our eye likes things that are well balanced. That means things that fit well together and that seem organized within the picture. The interesting thing is that this is not a new idea. Artists have been using fractions and equal parts to divide their pictures for hundreds of years. In art, we call this the golden mean or the golden section, and artists have been using it since the Renaissance, which was over 500 years ago. Basically, when planning a painting, an artist would divide their painting into 9 equal parts in a grid of 3 sections high by 3 sections wide, just like we've done in some of our works today. Then they would use this grid to decide on the best places to put objects, people, or lines in their painting so that it looks the best. It seems that by placing things in thirds, or 1 over 3, is the most appealing to our eyes. For instance, this painting by Marc-Aurèle de Fouet-sur-Côté follows this rule of thirds perfectly. When we add the grid, notice where the lines are. First, the horizon line. The line in the distance where the sky meets the land or water follows the top line exactly. We see some hills above the line, but that doesn't change where we draw the horizon. As a painter who studied in Paris in the 1890s, he was trained to know how to plan a pleasing composition. A painting that is 1/3 sky and 2/3 land would have been considered the right way to paint. So looking from top to bottom, in this painting, the top 1/3 is the sky, the middle 1/3 is where all of the bushes and water are placed, and the bottom 1/3 is the field. What is even more interesting is the placement of the person. He is the most important part of the painting, and we find his head right where the lines cross, 1/3 from the bottom and 1/3 from the right side. This is not by accident. The artist has placed him in what is believed to be the most pleasing or the most important area of the painting to make sure that we see him. And this is based on the fractions that we've just seen. If I were to use this painting for a math test, there would be all sorts of fractions we could find. Patterson-Ewan offers us another great example of fractions in art. This painting is called the Red Sea, and it uses a lot fewer details. So at first glance, you might think that the artist made it without too much planning. But let's take a look with a grid just to see how this fits. Once again, we see the horizon line that roughly matches the 1/3 line. I'm not sure if this artist would have carefully measured out his lines in a way that Sur-Côté did, but it is interesting to see that he used thirds when he drew the horizon line as well. Whether he did this by careful planning, or if it happened based on many experiences of seeing and making art, it seems that it is an appealing way to divide a picture for many artists. Now, how much of the painting is red? And how much is yellow? Try writing your answer as a fraction. This painting does it too. Some people see this as a landscape and others see it just as an abstract painting. But notice the line that divides the green section from the white. And look where all the floating shapes are. How would you divide this painting into equal parts? How many parts would there be? How much of the painting is green? And how much of the painting is white? Write it as a fraction. In our final example, we see a painting by William Karelic. Just like the previous painters, he has followed the 1/3 line for his horizon, although it doesn't quite line up exactly. Like the earlier painting, This one has one single person, but unlike Suzur-Cote, Karelic decided to place his figure and the road where the figure is standing exactly in the middle. Again, it would seem that this was done as part of a plan. Take a moment to look more at the painting. How does it feel compared to the earlier work? I don't find this picture nearly as comfortable to look at. The central position of the figure is dramatic, but it is harder to enjoy somehow. The artist made this decision for that reason. The painting is meant to suggest two possible stories, and the figure in the middle is faced with a choice. Each option is one half of the painting, leading us to feel like each choice is possible. We have talked a lot about fractions and ways to divide something into equal parts. We have looked at 7 paintings today, from abstract blocks of color to landscapes that look almost real, and a few steps in between. And while at first you might have thought that art and math are different subjects, the works that we've seen today should show you how closely related these two subjects can be. We can use art to teach math, and we can use math to better understand art at the same time.